we're going to learn about the rationale for, the benefits of, and look at the 7 different models of co-teaching. And additionally, we will talk about the different components of the collaborative instructional cycle, which that will play out and we'll hit each component along the 2 sessions for this PD. Down at the bottom, if you will take a minute, there is a bit.ly created for each of you to have the slides from the professional development with Lori and I. The QR code at the bottom will also take you to the slides. And then once you have either gone through the bit.ly or the QR code, the little 3 papers here kind of symbolize the handouts that we have. So you will have access to the blob tree itself if you would like to share that with your staff members or use it when you're trying to share the idea of co-teaching. And there's also different handouts that we'll ask you to look at along the way. And if you would stay with us, that would be super helpful. That way you won't work ahead or miss anything. But I'll give you just a minute to kind of get that set up. So you will have the slides as well as the handouts. If anyone is having trouble with that, if you want to drop it in the chat, I can also try to put everything in the chat if we need to. I just want to make sure it's there for you guys whenever you need it.
All right, so we are going to, when I click on my laptop, it goes 2 slides ahead. I'm not sure what's happening here, so I'll be a little more careful this time. Our collaborative co-teaching has 8 sections, but we want to focus on the first 3 today. They take a little bit longer, especially number 2. Number 1, rationale for collaboration. Number 2, co-teaching model combination. And number 3, WIDA and academic language. So today we'll focus on those 3, and then when we come back together next Wednesday at the same time, we will focus on 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. We had a couple of participants kick us off with the blob tree, but let's do this quickly just to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. If you will now put in your name and your district that you teach or work in the chat box. If you could put that in, and we'll take just a second to give everyone a chance to say who you are.
I love too that everyone seems to be from all over. It's not just one specific county. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Even as far as Transylvania County, I saw. Yeah, Brevard area.
Mhm.
I think we have several from Guilford County.
Mhm. It's all Chatham County. That's where I live. It's all one of those.
Wilson. Awesome.
Mhm. I
That is one
also,
positive. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I also did drop the handouts in the chat, but I'm going to do it again since we have kind of blown that up. So I'm gonna drop it a few more times throughout just to make sure no one misses it, as well as the bit.ly.
All right, and you can keep sharing where you're from if you've not done that, and we are going to move ahead. So we are going to start with clear rationale for collaboration. We want to share this slide. This is a very important slide, and the links are there. This is taken from the description of ESL co-teaching, and it is put out from DPI, from North Carolina. So we want to look at this LIEP types in NC public schools. And of course, as you all know, hopefully LIEP is language instruction educational programs. So if you will take 1 minute and read this slide silently to yourself, and then we're going to discuss some aspects of this. So you will see that it is shared and collaborative, right? And I love that part about integrate language acquisition, literacy, and academic content at the same time. And there is a caution there, right? ESL teachers coming in, they are not assistants. They are teachers, certified teachers who are teaching. So we want to make sure that this relationship is something that we build and work on equitably. We're going to look at some individual bullets about this same topic. So we're trying to move from, that standalone ESL program where it's just an ESL teacher in a building doing pull out all day to making sure that we are able to co-teach in classrooms with content teachers and meet the needs of multilingual learners, especially at those middle and higher proficiencies, that we can meet those needs in the classroom. We still need to have that pull out for those intensives, of course, if that works in the schedule and they are eligible for those services. So if you read this, the ESL teacher co-teaches, right, with equal responsibility with the mainstream teacher or the content teacher to ensure that multilingual learners receive appropriate instruction. So we are talking about utilizing those English language development standards and the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. The first bullet, multilingual learners are thoughtfully and purposefully placed with mainstream teachers who agree to the co-teaching model. That's in a perfect world, but we hope those schools who have that administrative backing and understanding about co-teaching would be purposefully putting those students in classrooms where those teachers have agreed to co-teach and are willing to work on that collaborative relationship. The next bullet, co-teaching class times are purposefully scheduled so that ESL teachers are scheduled for the same time. And you might interpret this in different ways. I did, the way the sentence reads, but just a purposeful schedule, knowing that these co-teaching times should be at the same time, hopefully every day, so there's consistency. But also it could be that there are multiple ESL teachers in a building and they also plan their co-teaching times at similar times. So then they also have other times to co-plan as ESL teachers and work on any other types of collaborative pieces that the ESL teachers need to do or meet with others. So the next one is planning time is purposefully scheduled for mainstream and ESL teachers to prepare for co-teaching delivery. And I think we're going to find out that this is one of the biggest challenges, right, for planning, trying to find a common time to plan, because we have to plan well to teach well. And then, of course, co-teaching is most appropriate for intermediate level English learners, multilingual learners. If newcomer multilingual learners are placed in the co-teaching classroom, they will also need that quality ESL instruction, that they should get that intensive English instruction. And then lastly, let me skip back. Yep, generally, an ESL teacher will work with no more than 3 mainstream teachers. This allows the ESL teacher to plan with those teachers and still lead those small pull-out classes. And I have co-taught before. My experience was mostly good, I will say. I had some great teachers that I co-taught with. I had 1 or 2 challenges, but at the schools that I was at, I did not co-teach with more than 3 different grade levels so that I could do it well and so that I could also have my pull-out classes. All right, Maggie.
And I think that that's a huge part of this. And when Kim shared earlier, she hit this specifically. It's all about a paradigm shift. It's no longer an I, or a me. It's more of a we. So with the new rollout of the ELD standards, with the content standards, we now have been lucky enough to have a mapping document. Co-teaching is the piece that we need, right? We can take our ELD standards and merge them straight with the content standards that the different grade levels are using. So it's requiring more collaboration to happen within the classroom. And I know later throughout the sessions today and as well as session 2, we will look a lot more closely into the standards, but just kind of us going through the light descriptions and talking about the standards to show the correlation and the relationship that has to happen in the content world as well as the language world. And so if you click on the image, it will take you to the mapping document. And then we can look at that. And you remember you have this on your own, so you could explore it even later. But it's just such a great resource to have, especially when you are co-teaching. It makes the relationship that much stronger. And I know with administrators on here, that could be a solid piece for the push towards that. And I think that that's great for us to have.
And I've got to move this over so I can get to on my laptop, it is not. I need to close that screen and it is not moving where I can get to it. Give me just a minute.
That's okay.
I have a question,
Yes.
Kim, again, while she's looking for that. I don't know who we have. I know you guys work with NCBPI. My
Mhm.
question is, with the EC department this year, I've seen a huge push for inclusion only. And I know that like we can't compare EC and ESL, but like my fear is that, do you guys know of any, or have any indication that ESL will ever move to that? Because I pray not. Because I'm like you guys, I think it takes all pieces.
Well, and Lori, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think when counties make their life descriptions, right? Like we have that, there are guidelines to follow. Like you would never want to put a newcomer in a co-teaching classroom where that's the only service they get because it isn't intensive enough.
Right.
If that makes sense. I
Yes, I
don't feel
agree.
like we will ever go that direction. Lori, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I was very focused on trying to
That's okay.
solve this issue and
She
I
said,
did not hear the question. If you can tell me again.
that's okay. Kim, would you like to ask again?
No, I think Maggie, you've got a good hold on
Okay,
it.
perfect. Okay, that's
It
good.
sounded like you were answering that.
All right. Well, that's great. And then, so we know kind of the push that you're feeling. I honestly do not feel like we will move to only inclusion and for co-teaching with kids that are learning new languages, especially English, because like I said, the service wouldn't be as intensive enough, and that's why the pull out piece is so special.
Oh, I
So
agree.
totally agree with
And I
that.
think with meeting like our guidelines and growth
Mhm.
for rates that our state puts on, and the whole academic language piece, and it's just a lot. It takes me an hour and a half every day with my students in the fall to be able. I teach high school and then do the instructional coach the other half of the day, and it takes me an hour and a half to get them to meet their growth and to exit and all that. And anyway, so I'm glad. I just wanted to just put that out there because I've been like
Yes. Mhm.
wondering for what yours are. So that's great. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. But on the other hand, we can't tell a story as well as the child themselves. So we have a video for you. So the true question you want to ask yourself is how do you get teachers to buy into the collaborative practices and co-teaching for MLs? And like I said, Lori and I have our own opinion, but you really learn from your student. So we have a short video for you. It's Wendy's story. And it's about a dually identified student who was an ML as well as receiving EC services, who also has speech. So you imagine what that day kind of looks like. She's constantly being pulled out of her room. So we'll see kind of where Wendy's story takes us. I feel like Wendy's story has a very powerful message within it. She was pulled so many different directions throughout the day, and finally she had had enough and she was like, no more. So I think this is a powerful message when you want to have people buy into the idea and the concept of co-teaching. This is a great video clip to share out because it truly shows the impact that being pulled in and out of classes has on the student. And it's way more than just Wendy, right? I think back to teaching and I think about how many kids were pulled out multiple times throughout the day for different reasons. And I think that it becomes kind of a hardship on that child. So being able to keep them with their classroom peers is so much more helpful. Which kinds of leads us into the next part about teacher collaboration. If you will take a few seconds to read the following quote in your head, yes, definitely frustration for sure. Yes, wanting to stay in class. And I think, I'm sorry to go back. Wanted to hit on this comment before we moved on. I think you definitely see that with older children for sure. They start to see the separation from leaving their classroom and coming in and out. So I think frustration is a great word to choose. Thank you, Deborah. If you will take just a few seconds to read this quote about teacher collaboration, I want you to think about what this quote means to you. And if we could, I'd love to discuss this quote kind of as a group. If anybody would like to share out, it is hard to get the balance for co-equal partners. I think that that's true. And I think hopefully we'll find some solutions to that throughout this training.
Well, teachers have notoriously big egos, and I think it's difficult to find teachers that match up in a good way. But I will say at my school, it's very nice, the collaboration. So
Now
And I
comment.
think,
I was
yeah,
going
go
to make
ahead.
a comment on that, that the first co-teaching training that I went to years ago with Dr. Joan LaChance, that was one comment she made, was that you have to leave your ego at the door. When you
Mhm.
come into a classroom, you leave your ego at the door and you work together. So, yeah, very
And
powerful.
it's funny just to think of that and thinking back to the blob tree where Kim says, "Oh, he's trying to catch them." And it's like, well, or did he push them? You know, you don't really know which one happens. I think there's definitely both sides of this. And Lori and I try to be as transparent as we can when it comes to that. But I mean, the relationship part is a part that we have to build just as much as the educational part, I believe. It all comes down to planning and relationships. I love that you included planning in that. Usually more collaboration between content teachers and grade level teachers, but not much. I also agree with that statement. Communication is key. Yes.
I can make a comment.
Yes.
If what I found, because this is my 13th year teaching ESL and at all different grade levels, I did a K-12 school even when I started. It's hard to lay the foundation. So, like in the beginning, what I found with laying the foundation and preparing as much as possible with those teachers beforehand, it took so much work on my part, like individually meeting with teachers. And then, but it laid the groundwork for the year that made it super smooth. So, I'm sure you guys are going to touch on that. It's like that preparation and taking the time to develop those relationships are essential. They're a pain because,
Yes.
us ESL teachers have 100 some plans to write at the beginning of the year. And then I have to change mine every semester, which is twice. And so, we have the same responsibility, say, as a classroom or teacher, not probably exactly the same. But it is that piece where we almost have to do more in the beginning, but then it lays the groundwork for the year, is what I've found.
And I think that's very true. And I know we'll hit on this. And that's one thing, Lori, I know that I'm bad at is getting ahead of myself. Just when you do something so much, it becomes routine and regular, right? So I think that exactly what you said, you do it at the beginning, it doesn't become as much of a hassle or seen as a negative. I also love that Ashley shared here. One of the big things that stuck out to her was that teachers were being seen as equals. And I think that that's a kind of a hard thing to overcome with like the ego checking and all of that. But I love that all of you are saying these things because that's things that I know Lori and I are going to talk about throughout the rest of the day today and next week as well. So thank you guys for sharing out. Here we have an image and it's from Friend and Cook, and I love it. It's like kind of how everything is intertwined. It's the essential elements of collaboration. So these are the things that kind of have to happen according to Friend and Cook. So if you look at this, think about things that are within your control, things that you can control. As you determine things that are within your circle of control, if you would drop some of those answers in the chat. things that we could do that are within our control as teachers. Mhm. And I will be very clear. I am one of those people, the willingness to share control. I'm not afraid to admit that. That's one thing that I learned a lot about myself throughout the co-teaching process when it started for me. I was one of the people that liked to remain in control, but it was also very nice for me to work with people that broke me out of my shell. So your willingness to share control is definitely within what you can control, and problem solving. Commitment. I love the commitment answer. This is definitely something you have to commit to. You have to give it everything that you've got. Negotiation, listening, tolerance. Yes. Frame of reference and nonverbals. Yes. And I agree with all of those. All right.
All right, so we'll move on. So what does true collaboration look like? We have the model from Richard Dufour of the Professional Learning Communities PLCs, as many of you know and are familiar with. And we know that different PLCs look differently. The 4 essential questions for those PLCs mark true collaboration if we're having these discussions about students and the data. Number 1, what do we expect our students to learn? Number 2, how will we know they are learning? Number 3, how will we respond when they don't learn? 4, how will we respond if they already know it? These are questions that we must consider. So I would say this is a model of true collaboration, especially if you are invited into a PLC to discuss your multilingual learners. So this afternoon we have an activity, a fun activity, we think, for us to talk about collaboration light versus true collaboration. So right now, we've been here for about 35 minutes, and I know some of you, I don't know if any of you are in transit home, but we hope most of you are settled somewhere. But if you're at home, if you will take 1 minute, we're going to set the timer, and we want you to get up and go to your kitchen and get 1 can. 1 can from your kitchen cabinet. So we will start the timer and come back in 1 minute. If you don't have access to cans,
I
then
have
you
a
can
drink,
just get up and
Lori.
stretch. Okay, that'll work. That has a label.
There you go.
And I'll start the timer. Here we go. And I think it is a siren, so in case, I hope that doesn't scare anyone. We may not even hear it since it doesn't appear to, the sound from videos are not working, and it may be because of my headset, but we'll at least have the countdown.
Lori, you know
That-
what's weird? When we practiced, it played on the slide.
Oh, wow. That's right, it did. All right, so I hope you all are running to the kitchen, you're grabbing your can,
And
you're standing up and stretching if you don't have access to a can.
Lori, I also
30
dropped,
seconds. Uh-huh.
redropped the handout with the copy of this when we get to it, just for everyone. For you to
awesome.
remember. Mhm.
Yes, perfect. All right, 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The alarm is in my ear. You all may not hear that.
You spared us.
All right, great. So now we hope you have your can, and just like we do for our multilingual learners, we have visuals, right? So this is just a way for us to include an activity where you can look at a label. And if you look at the can or whatever product you have, you can look on the back and see how it's set up, right? You see the nutrition facts, usually the serving size, the calories, fat, cholesterol, sodium, protein, vitamins, ingredients at the very bottom in small print. So if you will think about this label, and then Maggie shared the handouts. We have this handout oh, I hold on. There we go. It's like the disappearing paper, right? Okay. So we have the collaboration light and the collaboration, a true collaboration. Now, if you'll look at the screen quickly, we have you broken up into 2 groups, okay? So if your birthday is between January and June, January to June, January, February, March, April, May, June, then you are going to study that collaboration light label at the top. If your birthday is July to December, July, August, September, October, November, December, you are going to study that true collaboration label at the bottom there. All right, so we want you to look at that. And then for 1 minute, what we're going to do, the first group that has collaboration light, we're going to have the timer go. We want you to put into the chat, what do you notice about your label? Anything you notice about collaboration light. Ready, set, go. In the chat box, what do you notice about collaboration light? All right, our time is up. So first group, if you have not had a chance, if you will quickly just add something in the chat box about what you noticed. I see little substance, low risk. That is a great analogy. Love it. And I put 0% everything, right? Just nothing is there or barely anything. No progress is being made. Any others? Please share in the chat box anything you're thinking of. There is no wrong answer, I promise you. No nutritional value. So maybe little educational value, right? When there's very little collaboration. We're not working together for the student's best interest. Any others? You can keep adding. So let's move to the next group then. So those of you who had true collaboration, if you will, in the next minute, put in anything you notice about your label about true collaboration. I'll start the timer. Add to the chat anytime. Systematic support, great. Collaboration is embedded, daily routines, substance, effective teamwork. This is great. Accountability. It's got some meat to it. I love that phrase. High energy, right? Lots of protein and carbs. We need that balance. Relationships, yes. Feel free to add any more. Mm-hmm. 100% of the components, right. Achievement gains. All right. Let me look at the chat real quickly and make sure I haven't missed anything.
You
May
got it.
include time. May include time.
It talks about how much.
Yes,
it would
taking
take.
time. Yes, yes. I love that. I love that. May include the following. We've got a list there too. Right. Very good. All right, great. So just a visual way, right, to look at a label and think about collaboration light versus true collaboration in the form of a label. And of course, we want the highest nutritional value. We want the highest educational value for our students, and that would be that true collaboration. All right, so just wrapping up, we with this part, we can look at both of them together here and compare the words and see anything that might stand out to you. If anybody has any last wrap-ups about the difference between collaboration light and true collaboration, you can put that in the chat box quickly, and we're going to move on. Any last comments in the chat box? All right.
Right. Well, in order to make all of that successful, trust and confidence, yes. And I think that's two huge qualities that have to be had when these relationships start. You have to trust the person and be confident that they're doing everything right for the benefit of the student and not just the teacher themselves. I think those are great. In order to have all of that and to be successful, we can't forget the basics. And we're going to start talking about some non-negotiables. So within different co-teaching settings and the relationships, things can be negotiated. However, there are some things that cannot be. So these three are the true non-negotiables for true collaboration. So you have multidimensional mediation strategies. Everything that you do must be to enhance our multilingual learners' comprehension and access to English. And then you have to support them with the emerging language use. And I think that you'll see in just a few minutes how WIDA plays into this, and Lori got there. This is WIDA's connection to the language supports. These are to be used in the classrooms across all content areas. They benefit all students and not just our multilingual learners. And that's another thing that we have to think about when we're co-teaching, right? Like we are in there for our multilingual learners, but we kind of touch every child in the classroom. We're there to teach every child. So these are some different supports that can enhance multilingual learners' comprehension and access to English. These supports should be non-negotiables, right? They should be wherever multilingual learners are found. And it talks about different sensory support ways, graphic supports, and interactive supports. You will see a lot about engagement and interaction, the use of visuals and realia. There's so many great things that WIDA provides that we are able to use in the classrooms for not just us, but also the content teachers. So having this graphic is a huge support in the relationship between teachers. All right, this is my favorite part. These are some different non-negotiables, and I always kind of give my example that whenever I started co-teaching, I would not budge on, and it's something small and silly, but it is my personality to a T. My one non-negotiable that I had with my teachers is that I thought I had the neatest handwriting. So anything that we did within the classroom, if it was an anchor chart where we were creating with a class, if it was something for a word wall, it had to be done in my handwriting if it wasn't computer font. And that's just kind of, it's a funny kind of thing, but it's also very true for my personality. So these non-negotiables, I want you to think of 4 to 5 aspects of your teaching that you will want someone to know. Things that are non-negotiables for you, things that you would not want to give up. They can deal with classroom environment, organization, expectations, student engagement, different examples that you see on the screen. So we're going to set you up in different breakout rooms, and hopefully you will be with a partner. And I'm going to give you a minute or two prior to the breakout sessions to come up with 4 to 5 things that you deem as non-negotiables. Once you are in your breakout rooms, your job is to try to make that non-negotiable negotiable. So you may see that you're willing to give up more than you think when it comes to the co-teaching relationships. So I'm going to, before we set the 5-minute timer for you guys in breakout rooms, I'm going to have a 1-minute timer here. I want you to come up with 4 to 5 different aspects that are non-negotiables for you while I'm setting up breakout rooms.
And you can just jot those down or add them in your slide notes.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Lori. We have 26. I'm going, I can't remember if it pulls us. Lori, does it pull? We join later. I'm going to make 11 breakout rooms. And then that way there may be more than two in
You know what,
some.
Maggie, I'm also in as a participant,
Yes.
so it may throw me into a room. I'm trying to think if I should. I don't know if there's any way you can take me out, but we'll just
Let me
we'll
see.
just try it,
While everyone's writing down their non-negotiables, I'm going to try to.
or I can just go out and come back in later.
Okay. All right. I'm going to set up these breakout rooms. Lori and I will pop in if anyone is alone with how everything's set up. I will try to get you into a different session. We're going to set a 5-minute timer. I want you to share your non-negotiables with the people that are inside of your breakout session and see if you can make those non-negotiables negotiable after all. Fingers crossed, Lori. Here we go. So while you were in your breakout rooms, I did hear a lot of great conversations. If you would just take 1 minute to chat out one final non-negotiable that you realized could not be renegotiated. What is something that even after the conversations that you've had, you've decided that that's just not something that you can let go of? If you would share one of the answers that you guys talked about in the chat. Oh, look, that one's going to work. Oh, how my kids are treated. I love that answer.
Mhm.
Procedures for the classroom must be set from day one. Instruction at appropriate levels, right? Like differentiation and things. I think that's great. Mhm. If anyone has anything else they'd like to share out? Or Lori, maybe you even have something that you've realized along the way. Discipline, right? Expectations. I love that one. I think it's very important to have high expectations, following directions, accountable talk strategies and linguistic frames. Yes. That both teachers are responsible for student growth. I think that that's also something great. And that helps you be equal partners too, right? If you're both expected the same thing from each other, then you're both responsible for the student's growth and achievement. I love that. Thank you guys for sharing out your non-negotiables. I think all of those are great. And then winding down, kind of getting ready to lead up to our first break. We wanted to leave you with this before we had our first break. You have to understand that this is the ideal collaboration model, the different components needed for integrated instruction. You have co-planning, co-teaching, co-assessing, and reflecting. Those are the 4 things that we must do in order to have success with the co-teaching model. If one of these components is missing, then co-teaching itself cannot be successful. And we're going to kind of dive into that after we come back from the break. And with that being said, you guys just much deserve this well-deserved break. So you will have 5 minutes, get up, handle your needs and everything, and we will see you back here in 5 minutes.
Right, Maggie, if you want to take it away.
I forgot I was muted. We are going to jump in now to the different co-teaching models. So throughout the cycle of collaboration in the instructional part, the 4 circles, we're going to start with co-teaching, which is obviously the blunt of everything. And so we're going to start with all of that, and we're going to dive right into the co-teaching models.
And this might be a place where you want to take some notes for sure. If you've got your
Yes, and
copy of your
I'm so
slides or
glad.
a paper or
Yes.
anything, you will want to take some notes about these as we go.
And I'm also so glad you said that because it is part of the handout. I'm going to drop it back into the chat. And you should see one for the handout pages that say copy of co-teaching models handout.
Yep.
And that will help you.
Front and back is mine. I got it printed out yet.
Yes. Right. I got ahead of myself again. So you'll see here the 4 components. We will start with co-teaching. We're going to move through the cycle, explore the different aspects of this, and we'll start with the 7 different models. All right. First, I want you guys to look at this, read the definition. So read it in your head. And while you're reading, I want you to find the power word. Look for the power word. What would you say is the most important word in this definition? And hold on to that word as you're reading. Okay, now that you have that word, if you would add it to the chat, what is the power word in that definition? Perfect. Together, responsibility, share. I love it. Community. I love we have that in a lot of communities. Valued members. I love that. I wanted to frame it in a way that made it sound like there was one right answer, but I forgot to do that. So you're right. There's no one right answer. It's all of it and how well it goes together, and to make sure that we know that within this community, everyone's valued. We do it together and all that. So thank you so much for the different answers for the power word.
All right, so we're going to move into what we call the meat of our training. So this is the co-teaching models. And again, we want to refer you to that handout. So you're going to follow along with us using your handout. We have the model with some short definitions and a concrete example. So we are going to ask you what you notice about these models. So looking at this slide right now, think about what you notice about these 3. What's the commonality about these 3 models? Model 1, Model 2, Model 3. One group. All right. One group of students, right. So we have one group of students. Another commonality might be the teacher appears to be where? Where do you see the teachers?
And feel free to unmute too, guys, if it's easier.
Yeah, sure. So front of the room, basically front of the room, maybe the side of the room, right. Now, let's look at the next 4. So model 4, 5, 6, and 7. Let's look at what you notice about these models and the commonalities. You can certainly chat or speak. Trying to watch it as it pops up. 2 groups of students, 2 or more possibly, right? We might have stations, good, but at least 2 or more. What about the teachers? Anything you notice about the teachers?
Okay. More
Just
equal.
to be more equal, okay? Any other thoughts? All right, great. So we're going to move on now and explore each of the 7 models, but we wanted you to look at them in terms of the one group of students versus 2 or more groups of students.
All right, so with model 1, as Lori said, we are going to go one at a time, and we're going to talk about each model, and then we're going to show you some video clips for each model. Feel free, please use your handout while we're going through the different models. Take notes. It can help you throughout this entire process. These videos were training videos that were prepared in Washington State. So think about, we're going to ask you things like, what do you notice about each of these configurations? In this one specifically, in the special ed world, it is known as one teach, one assist. So one lead teacher and one teacher teaching on purpose, okay? We don't want assistants in the classroom, and that's one thing that we really try to avoid when we send an ESL teacher into a content teaching room. You're both equals. One is not seen as an assistant. Not that there is anything wrong with that, but when you have 2 teachers in the classroom, they both should be doing what they are doing best. So the language piece and the content piece. Instead, we took John Hattie's work that he was offering immediate intervention. It's one of the highest ranked variables in education. So why wouldn't we capitalize on the things that we know teachers are good at? So when you're looking at these, when we start the video, think about when you would use this and why you would want to, okay? Which one would you designate as the lead teacher and which one would you use as the helper? Now, one is the lead teacher and one is teaching others. So when you're doing this, we kind of want you to make or have a piece of paper handy. If not, feel free to type it in the notes for this section that you have on your slides. Think about an I notice and I wonder piece. And we do this a lot in the classrooms when we're doing some teaching, and this is a strategy that we use. What do you notice and what do you wonder? So while we are playing these video clips, what are things that you notice and wonder?
What?
I can hear it. I can hear your video. I can hear your video now.
Okay,
We've got
everybody,
7 co-teaching
thumbs
models.
up
The
if you can
first
hear.
model is one group. The
Okay,
students
awesome.
remain
Then
in
we're
one group,
together. Okay,
and
here we
then
go.
one
We're gonna
take it.
teaches and one teaches on purpose. So the idea with this model is that we have one of the teachers, and we don't identify who that teacher is, who is leading, because we've observed in many classes where it's the ESOL teacher who leads and the classroom or core teacher is the one who actually does the teaching on purpose. And we like to use the phrase teaching on purpose because it's not just someone who's drifting and floating around the classroom or the crouching and whispering type of teacher. It's a model that we believe should be done very purposefully and for a short amount of time during the lessons.
We're always talking about the lessons that we're teaching and who's going to lead this or who's going to lead that and how are we going to break it up to make sure we're meeting the needs of the students.
What did you notice about the pine cone? What did you notice about the pine cone? Elise!
It felt like bumpy.
Ooh, very good.
It didn't smell anything.
When you smelled it, it didn't really smell like anything, but it felt bumpy. Raise your hand if you felt the pine cone and you thought it was bumpy. It was a little
Did you think it was bumpy?
Excellent. Can anyone think of another word to describe how it felt? Bumpy or Gabriel?
It felt like really hard.
Hard. Very good. Was it soft?
No.
No, it was hard.
It wasn't
Excellent.
smooth.
Cora, it wasn't smooth.
I thought that it was bumpy and a little bit rough.
A little bit rough. I like that word rough. Excellent. What about how it looked? How did the pine cone look? How did it look, Luce?
Brown.
It's brown. Wonderful. And all pine cones are the color brown. Michaela?
What's that thing? Those bumpy things.
There were some bumps on them. Yes, excellent. What about how it looked? Were they all the same shape? Were they all the same shape?
They look the same?
Who can raise their
Were they
hand and tell me?
similar
Were they all
or were
the
they
same
different?
shape? Jack? They were all different sizes. Excellent. But for the most part, are pine cones big?
No.
No, they're small. And you actually find pine cones on pine trees. Now, one thing I want to tell you about pine cones, you might not know this, but pine cones are actually seeds.
The dangers of this particular model when one teacher leads and one teacher teaches on purpose is that that teacher who teaches on purpose might be perceived as the instructional aide who does not have an opportunity to interact with the entire class. So we often recommend to teachers to set a very clear intention or goal, what will be accomplished during that set amount of time when one teacher will be sitting, maybe even on the rug or on the side of the classroom with a particular group.
All right, great. I will take that as a miracle that it worked, right? And now we're going to come back together and debrief this. So take just a minute to think about your notes. I notice, I wonder. So if you will, in the chat box is fine. If you will put something that you notice, I notice, about this model. And if you have an I wonder, if you will write that in the chat, I wonder. Give you just a minute to get started and then we'll note some of these. Okay, I still wonder about the on purpose part. I think I missed something. Okay. So I think what the on purpose might be that the teacher is moving around to particular students for a particular purpose, maybe to clarify, to ask a question, make sure that they're following or understanding.
I even think too, Lori, the purpose part, I think a lot of people think of it as that she's actually teaching, but it could be that she's moving along to make sure that the students are engaged in the learning itself.
Okay.
And so I think that, and see, I even think. so.
Right. And somebody wonders if it could get distracting to others. I've heard that in several other sessions before. Would that be distracting when the teacher's moving around and talking to individual students? That is a true possibility. Right.
I like the
Wondering if,
different.
go ahead.
I was just reading them to you. I wasn't sure if you could see.
Sure,
them.
I can now. I'm on the
Okay,
other screen.
perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Yep. Just wondering if she pre-knew who to go to. So maybe there, of course, if she is co-teaching, she may be, scoping out the scene and looking for
Yes.
those MLs that need that help and making sure they're the ones that are following, they're engaged, they're understanding or asking her questions or her asking them questions to clarify. One comment was, I noticed a good way to label the different roles of co-teaching is that maybe you're talking about the lead teacher and the teacher on purpose. If you want to, anybody wants to unmute that commented, you want to clarify that, you certainly can.
Yes, I think you're talking about my comment, and I think
Okay,
that's
sure.
just a good way to label the different roles just to set the expectations from the start. I like it.
Yes, yes. So having that role identified and what the expectation is that both teachers are teaching, but what is that teaching role in that particular lesson? Good. Somebody noticed that the teacher set goals and objectives, right, for that teacher who's teaching on purpose as she moves. The other, I wanted to see back at the top about vocabulary. Notice
Yes.
lots of emphasis on vocabulary, right? The other teacher asked questions. Good. I do want to mention too that we should not be able to tell who the content teacher and the ESL teacher are in a really great co-teaching setting in a relationship that could vary at times. You might actually have the ESL teacher leading a lesson and the classroom teacher might be teaching on purpose or doing something on the side when that relationship is built. So we want to note that as well. Any
I think
final?
that's true. I think that's one of the greatest compliments that you could get as an ESL teacher is when someone comes in to watch, whether it be an admin or someone coming from a different school. As Lori said, that's one of the best compliments that you will get. It makes you feel really good.
All right. So remember model 1 because some of you are going to possibly work on this model in a few minutes and add some notes to in an activity. So let's move on to Model 2.
All right, with Model 2, we have 2 teachers that are teaching the same content. This is often referred to as team teaching or teaming. So think to yourself, why in the world would you want 2 teachers up front? What could 2 of you do that one of you could not do alone? Think of it that way. So why would you want 2 people there? We could have a debate. Lori and I, if we were teaming, we could each choose the side of a debate to kind of model it for the kids. Lori could write while I talked, except we know that that's my non-negotiable, so I would have to write while she spoke. What else could we have? If you would unmute and share some ideas, what would be a great way to do team teaching? And there's no wrong answer. Anyone wants to unmute and share out?
Well, one teacher might say things in a way that is more understandable to students. Like you
Yes.
may restate something the other teacher says, or just add to it if you see confusion or just a better way to teach that part. But it all comes down to relationships so that one teacher doesn't feel like the other one is stepping on her toes.
Yeah, I love that. I have actually had this conversation today that I've learned so much from the people that I have taught with that allows me to teach differently because it made so much more sense that way. So I love that. Can anybody think of another way that this model may be best or for what activity?
And one comment was to take 2 different approaches to solve a problem. Show
Oh,
those
yes.
2 different
Love that.
approaches. Yeah.
You could do a skit or you could play devil's advocate for one another. If Lori had something she was very determined on, I could say, well, what about this? You know, it's that interaction and that communication piece that our students need so much. I kind of what Michelle was saying, you being the ESL teacher, the ELD specialist within your school, you could be the voice for those kids that haven't truly found their voice yet, but you have that better relationship that can help aid within that classroom. The choice is truly endless for what we could do together. This is the only model that lets everyone see that you are dealing with equals because everyone's sharing the same load within this model. We can change our roles, go back and forth, but this is very critical to start your lesson or to end your lesson this way. It helps to create flow, to create structure, and to weave kind of these models together. So you can use more than one during a lesson. But we're going to cross our fingers and hope that video 2 works.
All right. So
I missed one, Lori. I'm sorry. I like that we have added in to complement or add another view, specifically cultural, which I love.
yes,
Because
very
this is not
important.
taking all of the kids out of the classroom so they can share that with some of their non-native speaking peers. I like that a lot.
All right. I'll start the video and give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Who wants to define what suffrage is before we go any further? What's the word suffrage? Good. The right to vote.
So I look at my title, goals for women's suffrage or reasons that maybe they want to vote.
So what are some of the other keywords that are in this advertisement? Alita, what did you put down, please? What's in that advertisement?
Keywords.
Okay, the American Women's Movement or Suffrage Association. And what are they going to have? Okay, they're going to look for their right to vote.
They're going to have meetings. What are they going to do at these meetings? Sounds fun. We're going to have songs.
They're going to sing and they're going to have a good old time. Music.
And this is ways, let's go to our second question. Based on this, how are women going to get this right to vote? How are they going to get it?
I said through protest. I'm not sure.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
What amendment is that, Ben?
Do you remember? That's all right. That's okay. Which amendment was it? Do you remember? Excellent. 19th Amendment. We talked about that when we talked about the amendments.
So we're going to use our First Amendment, which is the right to protest, okay, and our meetings to eventually gain the 19th Amendment.
They meet the same objectives, content and language objectives for the entire class. The two teachers take advantage of the special expertise that they each bring to the table. They often go back and forth like we do here.
Right, exactly.
Or the way we like to coach teachers in maximizing this particular model is asking them to set an intention. Why would you want to have two teachers up front instead of just one teacher? What can you accomplish together that you cannot accomplish on your own? And often we get answers such as, well, we could take different perspectives. We could have an argument and a counter argument.
Or different opinions and present arguments for those opinions.
We could use different instructional materials. One can manipulate a smartboard, and the other one
Could be using an erasable whiteboard or a chart paper, taking notes.
One teacher can lead a discussion, which is very, very important at the secondary level, while the other teacher is modeling note-taking.
Or using a modified or structural note-taking type of graphic organizer.
So this way, both teachers are actively engaged. One teacher is not just standing on the side waiting for the other teacher to finish that 5-10 mini lesson. So this kind of teaming, going back and forth, is very critical for teachers to practice. This allows the entire class community to view the two teachers as equals. They're truly partners.
It's also a good way to model how people are supposed to communicate with one another. And that's so very important, particularly in our secondary classes, where they see how two people who have a job to do can get along, who can negotiate with one another. Because a lot of co-teaching, you negotiate on the spot, especially if one teacher wants to change something and the other teacher needs to consider whether or not that's a good idea.
Right, so now we will debrief. So take a minute and look at your notes. I notice, I wonder, from Model 2, two teachers teaching the same content. If you will add anything in the chat box, we appreciate that. I notice or I wonder. Or if anyone wants to unmute. Most students seem to be engaged. Yes, very engaged.
Mhm.
They had a good flow. I wonder how long it took for this to come to fruition. Yes, because that relationship has to be there, right? That trust and building that relationship, that collaborative relationship for them to be able to ebb and flow.
Mhm.
Wondering which teacher was the ESL or ELD teacher and which teacher was the classroom teacher. I think that would be very hard to tell in that classroom. It was for me. They just went back and forth and even interchanged, even the roles they took, discussing and note taking, and then at one point they switched. Any other notices or wonders?
We have a few in the chat. They all came in
Sure.
about the same time.
Okay.
though.
Yeah, if you catch them,
Um,
you can
They,
read those
s-
out.
they said, I noticed that this was a well-planned lesson, which I'm glad you noticed that because we're going to get into that a lot later. It says, I wonder how much of each class was spent in this model. These teachers were able to support each other and allow the other to take the lead while the other supported students and vice versa. These are all great.
Yes. I think one of the most impressive parts to me was that one teacher could lead the discussion and really focus on what the students were saying, and the other teacher could focus on that note taking and capturing the notes and also modeling how to take notes for those students.
Yes. I think just the ebb and flow of that, right? They were so comfortable together. And that is what we want out of co-teaching. You want to be comfortable enough that, as someone mentioned earlier, you don't kind of step on anyone's toes. And that's definitely what they have. You could tell that the relationship piece was there for this model.
And I would say I noticed this would take a lot of planning,
Yes.
whether it is face to face or digitally in a Google Doc, or just, there's got to be a good amount of planning to ebb and flow like that.
Mhm.
All right, I think we'll move on to
Yes.
Model 3.
All right. Model 3, the next model. This is one teaches and one assesses. Think to yourself for a minute, how would this be helpful? Or when would this be helpful? And you can share it in the chat or you can share out. And while you're thinking, depending on the scenario, who would assess? Who would assess when one teaches and one assesses? I know that when I first started with co-teaching, this one, it didn't scare me. It worried me a little bit because I was like, one teaches, one assesses. How in the world would that happen? I think it would be helpful to assess the other teacher in terms of wait time and who was called on. And that may it blows my mind, Lori, because when I'm thinking of this, just the kind of mindset that I've had, I'm not thinking about one assessing the other teacher. So I think that's like the different perspectives that you get through these trainings.
Yes,
And
yes.
how I've done it for years. In my mind, I would have never even thought about that. So thank you, Melissa.
Right. Yeah, we're thinking about who's assessing the students.
Yes.
Right.
Or assessing students' language and how they answer. Love that. The content teacher or the ELD teacher could assess based on what the objectives were for the day. So depending on the lesson for the week, the day, that would determine who was doing the assessing. If the content teacher is looking for content knowledge, it would be the content teacher, or it would be the ELD teacher if we were looking for language use. And so I think seeing this model in just a minute will give you great opportunity on how to use this within your classroom.
Right. And I just want to comment back again on what Melissa
Yes.
said about that assessing, the other teacher. If you have a trusting relationship and you both want to grow professionally and do what's right for students,
Yes.
I think that is great. And I used to be a part of a peer coaching program, and that's what we did. We went into each other's classrooms and we assessed each other and coached each other. And I think that's great when you're co-teaching can be also coaching each other and looking for those things, like rate of speech, wait time, who you're calling on. That's an amazing way to look at it as well. All right, so are we ready to start the video, Maggie?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
The third model is one teaches, the other assesses. And in this model, what we've observed is short amounts of time in the classroom is spent doing some type of formative assessment. And that formative assessment is then used at some later time in the lesson, either to support students with a particular task, or it might be used immediately to group students to complete a particular task.
And this is what we meant earlier, that the co-teaching models really flow together. One model has a very particular purpose, such as teaching on purpose, could be easily connected to another model, such as collecting assessment data. Or while one teacher is collecting assessment data, he or she also has the opportunity to offer immediate intervention and scaffolding or tiering on the spot. So the 7 models do not have to be perceived as standalone individual strategies or practices. They are organically connected. And when we work with more advanced co-teachers, they see how one model flows into the next seamlessly. And they do not fear using multiple models within the context of a 40-minute period.
So your choice where you want to put it. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. Go. And pass it on.
You have trouble with that one?
Okay.
We're gonna do one like it today, okay?
Good, Noah. How you doing? Good? I love how you're using your algebra Bible. Love it. But we're gonna make sure everything's perfect in a minute.
Can you write that one on the
I
board?
want this perfect. You're due now. Okay?
Oh, she just said that. Okay, good. Thank you.
We good?
You were good.
And Lori, I know you're debriefing, but I just wanted to share one thing that I love about this that we haven't said. I love how it's across different content. We have not seen the same thing. Like we've seen history, we've seen math, we've seen reading. I really appreciate that because I think a lot of people believe that co-teaching can only happen in a reading block when it's really not the case. So I love that about all of this.
Yes, across content and across grade levels, right? We've got several examples. So we're going to look at I notice, I wonder, and the first thing I notice is that these teachers have been co-teaching together so long that they dress alike. Did anybody notice gray pants and black shirt? That's just funny to me. I'm sure that just happened. That was not planned probably, but those things happen with teachers too. So, but seriously, what are some things that you notice and you wonder about Model 3? If you'll put those in the chat. Good. Again, hard to tell the difference between the two teachers, right, as they're moving around the room. A lot of interaction, a lot of checking on students, assessing. Right, and one is checking to make sure that the students understands the content, right? They're both providing immediate feedback, but one has that purpose of assessing, and then they're going to use that data to then maybe group or reteach, right? Immediate feedback, we know that's what our students need. Anything else? Any I wonders? All right, I think we can move on to the next model.
And just like with Model 3, we're going to kind of look at this in the same way. So why in the world would you have two teachers that teach the same content? If you're teaching the same thing, why would you not just let one person do it? Okay, what can I do with only half of the students? If you look at the model, it shows two teachers, they each have a small group, but they're teaching the same thing. So if you look, it's pretty much half and half. It looks like targeted, leveled teaching. It could be a jigsaw. It could be heterogeneous grouping. It can be homogeneous grouping. Why would we do this? Why would we do this? And you can unmute or you can share it in the chat. Why would we choose to do differentiate instruction? I love that. Because I think that's the one thing that we need to remember too. We can't water down the content so much that we make it too easy, right? So, but if we differentiate our instruction, how we teach it to the kids that need it that way, it still gets the content objective across. I love that. It could also kind of be used if you don't have a lot of co-planning time. Each teacher could create his or her own planning portion. So they were in charge of what they were going to teach that day for that specific group of students. Of course, they do have to align, but it would be two very different angles on the same skill or lesson.
So this is actually, I get the point. I know what you're doing because you've split up that large group of students, but I mean, this is essentially what we do anyway. We've got two teachers across from the hall from each other with two classes teaching the same content. So, I mean, and I love the co-teaching. I would love to have another teacher, but the staffing, is where what it all comes down to, because you could double up classes, but you see what I'm saying? Am I on mute?
No.
We
I
hear
can
you.
hear
We hear
Okay.
you.
I can hear you.
We're
I'm
processing, we're
thinking,
thinking, yes.
So, I mean, but when I looked at that, I said, well, that's what we do already. Teacher across the hall, and
but the groups
a
aren't
teacher
as
down the
small.
hall that's teaching the same content. Not as much at our school because we're dual language, but yeah.
And I think that's where it comes, when you're really looking at differentiating and scaffolding your instruction, you would use their proficiency levels from their test scores and even the data that you have within your classroom. So you could gear your instruction specifically for a set of students that are pre-chosen.
Right. And then one thing we were going to do, and it is nice to think about maybe rotating the kids to a different teacher or rotating teachers teaching that content so they get it from a different teacher, even if you do it in small groups. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah, and I'll speak to this too because I actually did this model every week with a third grade science teacher about 9 or 10 years ago. And what we did was in the science classroom in that portion of her day, when I went in, we split the class in half. And she was teaching science, and I was teaching science, but I focused more on the vocabulary. So we had, she had half and I had half. And she was really about the scientific part and the process, and I would hone in on the vocabulary. And I also, in that smaller group, half of the class, I also could really focus on some of those English learners, those multilingual learners that I worked with even outside of that classroom on my own, especially some newcomers, and I could really hone in on the visual vocabulary. And then halfway through the lesson, we would switch groups. And so then we're teaching the same content again, and she's really focused on the scientific method, the process, and then I did the vocabulary again, the visual vocabulary that went along with that lesson in that half of the group. So, and it worked well for us. So that's just another idea about how it might look in a classroom. But we'll watch this and see how it's modeled here, and then we can talk about it.
With Model 4, the students are now divided into 2 separate groups. Sometimes they're grouped heterogeneously, sometimes they might be grouped homogeneously. A homogeneous grouping might be according to their language proficiency or their proficiency in the content that is being addressed. Now, in this way, 2 teachers teach the same content, but might not be at the same level, might be differentiated, might be using different tools. So we've seen that very often with this model in the co-taught classroom.
This is a classic example when you want to reduce the teacher-student ratio because you have 2 teachers. You want to address the same content objectives, the same learning targets, but you might use a different pathway. One other favorite teacher choice we have noticed was for the 2 teachers to flip-flop. If one is using smartboard technology and introduces or practices a particular content, skill, or strategy one way, the other teacher is using maybe more traditional instructional methodologies.
All right, guys, so we're going to do question number 2 together. All right, so I want you to go over and read it. And as you're reading it, look for anything that's important. Look for any words that'll help you figure out your equations. So as you're reading, I want you to underline anything that you think is important, anything that will help you write your equations.
So we're going to try number 2 together. But the first thing I want you to do is read it to yourselves. I want you to underline anything that you think is important. After you are done reading, I want you to check right back in with me with eye contact, okay? And we're going to freeze and talk about it, okay? Go.
All right, so who can tell me what we're talking about? We know it's a system, so we're going to have 2 variables. What are those 2 things that we're talking about? Amir? Right, the tickets for the child and a ticket for a senior. Okay.
Okay, everyone check in with me. Eyes up. Okay. Did we understand what we were reading? Is there any words in there that might have tripped you up or you want to talk about? We're okay? You sure? Okay. So now we're going to take the next step. I want you to write our 2 equations with 2 different variables, and I want that let statement. All right, I'm going to walk around, and you can stop me at any time. We're good? All right, you're back on your own. Go.
After a designated amount of time, the two teachers flip-flop, and the students benefit from both sets of instructional strategies and both teachers' expertise.
What's the opposite of same? The same, it's the difference.
Oh, the difference.
Who needs help? What do you got? That's good. That's perfect.
The challenge of this model is often the level of sound in the classroom. But we find that usually the students are not distracted by that. The teachers most often are. So they may be reluctant to try this model. Also, classroom space sometimes dictates whether or not this model can be used. If you have a large number of students in class and the classroom itself is small, then this model might not be one that can be readily used.
All right, so let's debrief Model 4 then. Think about your I notice, I wonder notes that you have, and if you will put some of those in the chat box and we can talk about those.
I am one of those people who is very loud, so that is how I feel about this model.
That it might bother the teachers and not the students so much, just learning to, and maybe adjusting teacher volume, the voices, so that both can be talking at the same time. So what all did you notice, or what do you wonder about this model? You can put that in the chat.
They need to know the content of the whole lesson, not just one part.
Right. Notice that 2 teachers had different approaches, right? And one was more on their own and the other had check-ins. Like let them work on their own and the other had more check-ins, right? More support. One thing I noticed while you're typing in is that I think in the smaller groups, students are more willing to speak up and say, you know, if what they need help with. In the whole classroom in a big group, sometimes students are hesitant to ask for help or say what they need or clarify. But in a small group like that, I think they feel a little more comfortable. Any others? Any other comments? Right, I don't see any else. Anybody else? So we'll move on then.
Okay.
All right, so Model 5.
Okay, and we will actually look at models 5 and model 6 together. They kind of go hand in hand. It's 2 groups where one teacher pre-teaches and one teacher teaches alternative information. So model 5 is pre-teaching. Okay, our multilingual learners need pre-teaching for sure. It's one of the ways that we could kind of get them ahead within their content classrooms. And if you need to front load background knowledge, this would be the way to do that. This is how you're going to do that, because we know if we build upon what they already know, it will just help with the pushover into content that much more. And the fact that you taught it doesn't mean that they've gotten it, right? Like I've done that before. I thought I've had a perfect lesson, and then we dive into it the next day and it's just gone haywire. So I think, you know, as much pre-teaching as we could do, this is a great model to do that. It also kind of leads into model 6, which is reteaching. But for now, this one is kind of similar to model 4, as in there's 2 groups, but this one is for pre-teaching. Thank you, Carla.
So Model 5 is designated for pre-teaching. We understand that English learners are a very unique group of youngsters. Often they come with very strong backgrounds. They bring their funds of knowledge, their prior experiences, but some of these experiences and prior knowledge are not connected to the core curriculum in an American school. So they need an opportunity to be pre-taught, pre-teaching content, pre-teaching key concepts, front-loading the language or linguistic structures are all a very, very important part of working with English learners.
Interestingly enough, we've also seen this model where there are not just two groups, although that's the classic model with which you have a smaller group being pre-taught and a larger group maybe digging deeper into the curriculum, not moving ahead. With this pre-teach model, where we've seen it also being successful, is that there are multiple groups occurring. Therefore, the students don't feel like they're being singled out, and yet the other groups are maybe digging deeper, and the students who need the pre-teaching are pre-taught.
So yesterday when we were practicing, we were trying to find some letters that make sounds. So I'm going to give you a sound, and you're going to point to the letter that makes that sound. Are you ready? What letter makes the B sound? What letter is that, Henry? So let's say it together. B, bat, B. Say it with me. B, bat, B. Tatiana's going to take
sounds.
this
Do
one,
what?
okay?
That it makes a word or it makes a new sound? They stick together, right? They make a new sound. Let's drill our glued sounds. Are we ready? A-L-L, ball, all. Eyes are up here. I want to see your lips moving. A-M, ham, am.
Say it with us. Ready? P, pan. Good job. Tatiana, say that for me.
P, P.
Good job. One more, and then we're going to practice writing. Tatiana, what makes the T sound?
T.
Say it all together. T, ta, T. Good job.
Like my name.
Like, Tatiana, I love how you made that connection. Your name does start with the letter T. That's right. Now we're going to practice writing some of the sounds that I say. Are you ready?
And that also exemplifies how connecting Model 5 and Model 7, again, are very organic, very natural, depending on the class size, depending on the goals or objectives for that particular lesson. Teachers might decide that 2 groups are not enough. They would need to choose more than 2 groups.
All
Lori,
right.
you have to tell Smart Agent to wait.
Yes, and it did not give me that option. Did you see that message?
I did.
Okay, so it says it. I
Hey,
wanted to
we
say
have
it
a break in
later.
a few minutes. We're going to get there.
Okay, all right. So let's hope it doesn't restart. If it does, we'll take a break. Okay, so let's.
We're doing 5 and 6 together. Do you want to go ahead and do 6 and then debrief both?
Yeah, let's do it that way.
All right. Model 6, where Model 5 was pre-teaching, Model 6 is reteaching, because everybody can use the little hand emoji down there, I'm sure, and raise your hand for a time that you've had to reteach something because it didn't go over well the first time. And that's just kind of how life in general is with these multilingual learners, is we have to find ways that go with their method of learning. So you may have to reteach. So we have pre-teaching and reteaching. So here is a video to support Model 6.
The next model is Model 6, which, again, students are divided into 2 groups, usually unequal groups, and they're grouped for reteaching. Now, similar to Model 5 in its configuration, the reteach model is one which is very common and similar to what occurs in special education models that for co-teaching. But here, it's that spiraling of the curriculum where you teach and then you assess and then you reteach. So we like to assure teachers that not only English learners are going to need that reteaching, that there are going to be other students that might be joined with English learners, some English learners that need reteaching, that some English learners might be with the students that are digging deeper and going more in depth into the curriculum. So they should never be grouped as ELs, non-ELs. So that's one thing we want to make clear about these particular models.
So when we're teaching, we use, most of the time, primarily we use multiple teaching so that there's multiple groups going on throughout the day. And that really is what we center everything around. So if we're doing reading, I'll have a group, Danielle will have a group, and there's a group working independently. And even in that independent group, we might break that group apart so that there's two different independent
tasks.
groups going on at once. So yesterday, we have been making, what have we been making? You tell me, what have we been making? Look over here. What have we been making together? What have we been solving? What are these called? What do we call these? Numbers. And we put the numbers together, we call them equations. That's right, we call them equations. Are we making addition equations or subtraction equations? Look, I want you looking here though. Don't look at me. My answer is in my face. Is this addition or subtraction? Not subtraction. Remember, addition. This is a plus sign. So, Tatiana, what is this called? A plus sign. That means that we're adding. Sebastian, what are we doing? We're adding. What kind of sign is this? A plus sign. So we're making addition equations. Sebastian, what are we making? Equations, right? So we're going to try a little bit different this time. We're going to count, and we're going to use our blocks to help us to count. Who thinks they can read this addition equation for me? Who can read it for me? Sebastian, I want your eyes here. I want you thinking about how you could read this addition equation for me. Rena? Good. I love how you took a thinking minute and you remembered that this was a plus sign. Sebastian, let me hear you read this equation. What number is this? If you're not sure what number it is, let's count our dots at the bottom. So what number is this? Great. Read the equation. Great.
Another important point about Model 6 is English learners need multiple meaningful opportunities to interact with the target content, to practice language. Just because you taught it, it doesn't mean they got it. So simply teaching the past tense or any kind of grammatical point, teaching vocabulary, introducing students to a particular concept does not mean that they have attained that concept. So we need to give them multiple opportunities to practice. The reteach model is a great way to allocate time for that particular practice and application.
And in your teams, we're going to have team level. Now remember, with levels, you have to be perfect at that level before you move on, yes? All right, in your teams, we want you to work together. We want you to work hard, okay? Again, if somebody is having trouble, make sure you bring them along. On top of it, we're going to open up a help desk. So our help desk is going to be right up here in front, and Ms. Pantanelli might choose a few of you. But if you have any questions or you're struggling at all, come on into the help desk. Okay, once you get it, remember, get out. You got another member. Thank you. As is, I gave him an extra one too. Okay,
sure. Okay. So read the next one and see if you could do that with the next one, okay? With the next sentence. See if you can find that word. Okay, Andy. Reading the first sentence.
The difference of two numbers.
What is difference?
Minus.
Okay, so what two numbers are you going to be subtracting? The difference of two numbers.
But we don't know the two numbers.
Right. So if you don't know the two numbers, what are you going to write?
X plus Y. X minus Y.
Good. All right, here. Right. Sorry. La diferencia entre dos números. Okay. 200. So dos números que tú no sabes. Right? So two numbers that you don't know, X minus Y equals 3. Good. what is this?
Oh, equal.
Thank you. So now do the same thing. So you said sum. So now you're adding. What are you adding?
All right, so let's debrief. So we're thinking about model 5 and 6, similar models, but with 5 it is pre-teaching, and then model 6 reteaching, and the other teacher is teaching alternative information. And I like the fact that they pointed out it is not moving on, but maybe digging deeper with that group while the other is being pre-taught or retaught. I love the idea of the help desk. I know you noticed that. And that classroom has been set up so that the students feel very comfortable, right, to do that and get that help. Another point that they made was that you should not use this model to separate our English learners from non-English learners. This is a way to have them with their peers, right? But pre-teaching several students that need that pre-teaching, and then with reteaching several students that might need the reteaching, but L's could be included. All right, so if you'll go ahead, Maggie. Oh, sure.
I mean, so it's great too, because this is a way that you ensure that pre-teaching does happen. And it's a lot of times left out of the classroom, not on purpose, but because it's something that people don't think about. But this is a great way to make sure that you hit that prior to diving in deep.
All right, so look at your notes for whatever you wrote. I notice, I wonder, and if you could add some of those in, and you can be as specific as you want for the pre-teaching or reteaching, or speak to both of these at the same time about how that model works.
Oh, great for newcomers.
Yes, and probably both of those, right? Pre-teaching and then sometimes reteaching, but especially that pre-teaching and building background knowledge.
Mm.
The reteaching, you notice that one teacher was using the student's first language as support, a newcomer, and the teacher happened to speak that language, so she could do that phrase or a couple of sentences to get them going, but then she went right back to the target language of English. You know, you may have students in your classroom that speak Chinese and Arabic, Russian, and you may not speak those languages, but if that home language is a language that you speak and you can use that as a support briefly to move that lesson along, you certainly can. Where multiple reviews are needed. Okay, good. Any other comments about 5 or 6? I really think about this model as the same model in my head, just interchanging out the pre-teaching versus the reteaching.
Yes.
All right, you can keep adding if you'd like, but we're going to move to model 7, our last model.
All right, model 7, the last model is as many learning stations or as many groups that you need. Again, please, when you think about this, think of the endless amount of opportunities that this could bring. The classic model is usually 3 groups that you will see in the video. And I know a lot of people take advantage of this within their classroom. It's usually I take a group, you take a group, and then there's an independent workstation as we rotate. This is sometimes referred to as station teaching. And this image here shows that you may use up to 4 groups. You take 2, I take 2. Or maybe it'll even be stationary spaces where the students are working independently. You may leave them all where you get up and you kind of circulate around the classroom. It's truly the ideal model for just endless opportunities. You can have 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups. Honestly, your curriculum will dictate how many groups you have, who is monitoring, who is supporting, if a teacher is traveling with a group, or maybe you want to decide that no group is actually stationary or independent. It's important that both teachers are monitoring the entire classroom. So even if you're with a group, it's very important that you are observant of the classroom to see kind of what's going on in the different stations. And I know that we are not superheroes, although some people like to think that we are as teachers. We can't see everything. But we are going to take a look at the classic configuration of the 3 groups. But I want you to really keep in mind as we're watching that this is not the only way to do this setup. And before we watch, I'll share, and this is kind of a personal thing. I know a lot of times with station teachings, it's very repetitive. So as you're watching this as well, think of ways that you could make it less so with the different amount of groups that could be added later. So now we will watch Model 7 in video and debrief after.
All right, so let's look at Model 7 and think about the I notice, I wonder from your notes. So take just a minute, and if you can chat. And Maggie, I cannot see the chat with my screen shared on my Chromebook, so if you can read those.
All right, I've got it. What do you notice or wonder about Model 7? And honestly, like I said, from my perspective, Model 7 for me is probably my least favorite if it's used as in group rotations, because I do not like the repetitiveness of it. And I know it's a lot of people's favorites, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just truly that's what's so great about co-teaching, is that all models offer something different. And you can also unmute and share out something you notice or wonder about station teaching or two teachers monitor and teach. Students may know which group they are in. It's good for small groups and differentiation. And Naomi, and I may be reading this wrong, are you saying they would know if it was based on differentiation, which group they were in ability-wise? Yes, okay. Yes, I agree with that. I think that's a little hard sometimes. Perfect. All right, Lori, if you want to debrief that one, that looks like all we have so far.
All right, sounds great. So station teaching, and I was trying to get back in while you all were watching the video, but from what I can remember and from my experience, I really do like this model. It does take a lot of planning and preparation, of course, again, and sometimes it can be more than two teachers. I have been in situations where the classroom teacher, an EC teacher, and an ESL teacher were all in a classroom working together in stations. And I think one of the benefits too of this, and I apologize if you've already mentioned it, is once a teacher is working with a group, that they can move over and do some independent practice and then go to a teacher for more support and then move over to independent practice and just those much smaller groups. But this is just another model. So it's another option. And we have 7 to choose from. All right, so I think we're going to move on now to.
Or you have 3 more. I just don't want to leave out any comments. It says that they don't want to make the group static. They need to change weekly based on data. And we have an I wonder if this would be best used mixed with another direct instruction team teaching approach. And I love that, like meshing models together. I think that's totally great.
Yes, and we do want you to think about that option to work with different models and what model might flow into another model. Right, good. All right, so are we ready to move on then?
We are.
Okay, and we've had our break, right? So we're going to move on to Let's Become Experts. So we're going to dig a little deeper now into these co-teaching models. So I'm going to put you in groups, and there'll be fairly small groups, and we're going to do a co-teaching model Jamboard. In your group and on the Jamboard, you're going to identify the following for the model that you're assigned. What is needed to make this model work, the challenges the model possesses or poses, the possible lessons you might teach using the model, so maybe just an example, and other models that will work in conjunction with your assigned model, those that you might think might flow in and out of that. So when you go to the Jamboard, and it's on the next slide, and I'll show you.
I can also drop it in the chat if you would
Okay.
like to leave this slide up.
Sure. Well, we do have it. So this one, yep, and we can come back to it. This is the one that you can click and get to the Jamboard, and Maggie will drop it in the slide. But we're going to work for about 5 minutes, but I need to assign you, okay? So I'm going to open it just so you can see it. Now, this was the best way on the participant list that I had to figure this out. And just hang with me here. We're going to try this and hope that it works. Model 1 on the Jamboard. If your first name starts with A, the first letter of your first name starts with A, if you'll work on this one. Model 2, if your first name starts with C, all right, as in Cecilia. For model 3, we don't have many of these, but if your first name starts with D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, you will work on model 3. Model 4, if your name starts with, and listen carefully to this one, M as in Mary, but M-A, only the M-As, because we have Mary, Marcy, there were a lot of M-As, Maya, M-A. 5, model 5, if your name starts with M, but you're M-E or M-O, we had some M names that had another vowel after if you'll start, and N's and O's and P's, all right? So that would be model 5. And then model 6, if your name starts with Q, R, or S, we had several R's and S's. And last but not least, model 7, I skipped B on purpose. B, I think we might have a Beverly if she's in attendance. So Beverly, and then if your name starts with T-U-V-W-X-Y-Z, if you'll work on model 7. That seems really random, but that's how it would work out. And if you get in there for the 5 minutes and you work on your model, and you have extra time, if you want to pop over to one more and try to add something, you can. So on the Jamboard, as you see, you're going to add sticky notes. You can click and you can type in.
Lori, we can't see the Jamboard. You're still
Oh.
sharing the slide. I think it's just because you're on the Chromebook now. It might be the tab.
Okay. I'm so sorry. And I thought everybody saw that. Nope. Okay. I had it open on my screen, but it didn't show.
That's okay. No.
Okay. All right.
They
So
have it in the chat.
all right. So everybody can see though, if you go to the link and go to the Jamboard, go to the model that I assigned you by the first letter of your name. Don't stress out about it. If you get to one and don't remember, just pop over to another one and add some notes. I'll go back to this slide. This one. Yep. What is needed, the challenges, possible lessons, and other models. So remember the assignment, and then I will set the timer now, 5 minutes, and you can go and work on your Jamboard.
If we look back through again at the Jamboard, if we look back through, we're going to give you a few minutes just to kind of gaze. And I feel like a lot of you already have. If you will look at each of the co-teaching models and review the different Jamboards, I want each of you to look through and choose which model would be your favorite or your preferred model for teaching or co-teaching. If you had to leave here at the end of session 1 today and say without a doubt which model you believe would be your favorite, which model would you lean towards? I already know my answer. If you look through, we'll give you a few minutes to look through. We have someone that says model 2 seems like it would be so much fun. And Deborah, that is exactly the model I would choose.
I was going to say, is that the one with 2 teachers in the same room doing, passing it back and forth? I think that would be fun.
Yes. And I use this model a lot. I co-taught an entire ELA block with a 4th grade teacher at an elementary school. All 90 minutes, my schedule supported that. So that was great. Yeah, and we team taught a lot with novels, and it was so much fun.
I've actually done parallel and station, but that's a lot of people have done that, but I've never done model 2.
I love that. I'm seeing, and the other thing that I love is that everyone's choosing so many different ones. Lori, I know you can't, or I don't know if you can see the chat, but we have a lot that like model 2. We have some that like model 2 and 3 because of the real-time data that you could gather with the assessing model. And I think that's great. Melissa prefers 6 with reteaching and model 7 for station teaching. And model 5 for Miriam. Model. I love that everyone has something totally different. Pre-teaching and reteaching are always great, specifically for our multilingual learners, for sure. I think that that's very, and the great thing about the Jamboard, you will have access to that. So after our session wraps up today, you can go through and look at some of the challenges and some of the great things that you could gather from these different models. 5 and 6, because it gives both teachers some freedom in the teaching strategies that they use. And I like that a lot. Lori, you will like this. A lot of them, planning is the concern. And so I know that we address that later in the sessions.
Yes, we will.
That's great.
That's
2
always a
and
concern.
5. Yes. 2 and 5.
All right.
Yeah.
So
your screen isn't sharing anymore, Lori?
It is not?
Nope.
Okay, I shared it and it's not sharing. Okay, let's try this again. Thought I had
station
screen.
6 reteaching. Love it. And I love, like I said, the notes that you guys have added onto the Jamboard. I think that is great.
Can you see it now?
I can. Yes.
Awesome. All right, so we have one more section tonight to wrap up, and everything's loading here. So I have to work on my technology before next week. I'm trying to get to, there we go. Can you see WIDA and academic language?
We can.
All right, so for the last about 12 or 13 minutes, because we promise we will wrap up right at 7, we want to look at WIDA and academic language. So we know that North Carolina is a WIDA state, and of course we follow the WIDA ELD standards, and we want to make sure that we highlight this. So this is the section that we're going to look at. So quickly, and we may reduce this time just a little bit, I want you to look at this slide. What's the deal with guiding principles of language development and collaboration? So if we were in a classroom, and this is a neat activity to do face-to-face, and even with your students, you can give students a card and then they can group up based on whether they are spades, diamonds, clubs, or hearts. And you could have them work in parts of the room in their group. So virtually though, this is just a way to put you in a group. So thinking about the guiding principles, and the guiding principles are linked here, and it's also a handout that you should have that Maggie shared.
I dropped it in the chat as well.
All right, awesome. And just so you know, it does look like that. I don't know if you can see that or not, but you can find that. So, but you can click on the slide here as well and see it. But just quickly, last name. If your last name starts with A through F, then just go below, just drop down past that spade, and you'll see you're going to read guiding principles 1, 2, and 3. If your last name starts with G through M, read guiding principles 4 and 5. If your last name starts with N through S, guiding principles 6, 7, and 8. And if your last name starts with T through Z, read guiding principles 9 and 10. And these are just 1 or 2 sentences. So if you will read that, and then we're going to do a quick chat activity. And we'll take about 2 minutes. All right, so the 10 guiding principles of language development highlight how students develop and use language. They acknowledge the diverse linguistic resources that our students draw from and the unique pathways they follow throughout that process of learning English. They help us to deliver appropriate instruction to our English learners. So right now, what I want you to do is if you will drop in the chat box based on the guiding principle or principles that you read, just write one quick phrase or sentence and explain how collaboration and co-teaching would help support one of those guiding principles. And then Maggie, as you see those come in, if you want to read a few out loud.
Okay, I can do that. I know one way for sure, if anyone also wanted to unmute and share. The thing that gets me about the collaboration part in co-teaching is, oh, never mind. Someone came through. So let me read theirs before I take it. It says collaboration can open more opportunities for students to practice language through multiple modalities. And then for number 1, it says collaboration will help support students to know that their language and culture are valuable resources in the classroom. I love that one. Another one we says, I think that collaboration can help us make sure that we are limiting our implicit biases and allowing the team to create activities that meet the students' needs and are allowing for meaningful activities for ESL students. Love these. It's great that each teacher brings specific strengths just like a student can. So the more adults connected to a student, it's more the more strengths are shared. Love that.
Yes, thank you for sharing. These are wonderful perspectives on how collaboration supports those guiding principles.
And we have one more for 4 and 5. Have students analyze how content relates to their own experiences for social and emotional development and acknowledgement of their lived experiences. And being able to share that within the classroom and expand upon that. That's great.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to move ahead with our next slide, and we're going to just touch a little bit on WIDA and give you a little bit of homework before next Wednesday. So Maggie, I think
Too much. First, we're going to talk about the big ideas of the North Carolina English Language Development Standard Course of Study. Here is anchored by 4 of the big ideas. If you look at these, which 2 do you think relate the most closely to co-teaching? Which 2 out of these 4? So unmute or drop it in the chat. Yes, collaboration and equity. Love it. And it's also the integration of the content knowledge, right? The content and language. So, yep, collaboration, all of them. Yes. So you have to be able to have those. And then the 2 that co-teaching brings in is integrating content and language, and also the collaboration between the 2 teachers. So while all 4 of them are big ideas for co-teaching specifically, it'll be the integration of content and language and the collaboration for the stakeholders. But I love how equity is brought into that as being seen as equal partners, and also the functional approach to the language development. Yes, you're all right. And here we have the 5 standards for the standards for our side. And the very first one we have is the standard 1, the language for social and instructional purposes. It's broader in the scope and applicability than the other 4 are. So it's kind of crossed and associated with all of the other discipline specific learning. So standard 1 kind of encompasses all standards. And then here you will see the new key language uses or clues that you will see a lot. I've seen that so many times with the new acronym and it throws me off. But we have the key language uses that are here, and they are used to exemplify the big idea or the functional approach to language development. They emphasize language use for particular purposes with particular audiences and in particular sociocultural contexts. So you will see that we have narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And then we use those to kind of adapt our standards on what it is that we're trying to teach, the objectives within the classroom. So you will see in the different colors, different examples or ways that you can use those. And that's fine. And then we also have, I love this image and it's getting very close to supper time, so now it's making me hungry. So we have the levels of English language proficiency and how they develop across the different levels of this proficiency. So WIDA's framework distinguishes 6 levels of language proficiency. Each level is defined by specific criteria. Level 6 is reaching, which represents the end of the continuum. It means that everything that they could do at a level 5 has been accomplished, and that is how you reach level 6. In other words, level 6 kind of, we know that the exiting score for us is a 4.8 as the average. Level 6 means that you are the equivalent of your English speaking proficient peers. So I want you to think of a specific multilingual learner within your classroom. Consider their level of their English language proficiency and reflect on how co-teaching would benefit that student within your classroom. How would it help his or her language development as well as their academic growth in their content specific areas? If you could, think about that student and add one idea to the chat box. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to add in, there is a blog that shares more information on the visual itself, on the image, and I think you guys will find that helpful later. Showing what should be accomplished at each level of English language proficiency. Think of that one student and how co-teaching could benefit that student. And if it's easier to unmute and share, I'm also fine with that.
And we have about 1 minute left.
And feel free to email these answers to us as well. Our email and everything is linked within this if we feel like we're rushing towards the end. Lori, you're fine to go ahead and move on and I'll read them if you would like to go to the next slide.
All right, so we're wrapping up. This is your homework, and we tried to make it something that would be interactive and fun. We are not sure about each of you and how familiar you are with the North Carolina ELD Standards Resource Hub. It is an amazing resource that has been built at DPI. So we want you to visit this before next Wednesday and spend some time there, like a scavenger hunt, and explore and look at all the icons there. Especially, we want you to focus on unpacking and mapping. We want you to look and get familiar with how the Standards Hub is set up, and how the unpacking is laid out, how the mapping is laid out, and think about how that would help you in your collaboration and co-teaching. And we'll address that next week. So the site is there, bit.ly/ELD Standards Hub. And I don't know if Maggie, if you want to drop that in the chat box as well. And I would bookmark that if you would. I've done that on all my computers so you can get to that hub quickly. So if you'll spend some time in there, 30 minutes if possible, and be ready to explore some more next week. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We want to say thank you for attending. And if you don't
Thank you for
mind,
bearing with us through all that.
any of you that would put your cameras on, we'd love to see your face and And Wade, good night. We are ending right at 7, which is amazing. Even I apologize again for my technology issues, but thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you spending 3 hours with us, and we hope that this is a good first half to get you thinking about collaboration and co-teaching. And have a wonderful night and have a wonderful week. And we will see you next Wednesday at 4.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thank you, Lori and Maggie. Great job.
Thank you, Ivana, for your support.
Thanks, Ivana. Thanks, everyone. And Lori, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.
Okay.